Well, here we are. This is the first live stream of my new project on YouTube. And I want to talk to you today about the danger that the United Kingdom and the United States of America face because of the actions of the European Union. We've heard, haven't we, for so long, the piety and stupidity of the European Union, continually talking about the way that they have prevented conflict in Europe because of the unity that they've created. Well, that's not true, is it? Because first of all, there were problems in the Yugoslavia, which, okay, weren't members of the European Union, but were certainly within the European Union's borders. If you just think about what's in between Italy and Greece is the Balkans. So there were issues there, significant issues there, but also there's what's taken place in Ukraine. Now, this video today is not an argument in favor of rewarding Vladimir Putin for what he's done, nor is it a video talking about particularly the rights or wrongs of the situation. It's a video talking about the way that the European Union themselves, in their determination to be expansionist, have put the world at risk. I genuinely think that Vladimir Putin was, at least to an extent, provoked by the European Union, but more importantly than the fact that he was provoked by the European Union, it's the fact that the European Union have prioritized their own vanity over the safety and security of the European continent, and we should be rebuking them for that. And the minute that the United Kingdom and the United States of America attempt to take action to protect Europe, we see the danger of the European Union itself. Let me tell you something. The piety of the European Union is absolutely wrongly placed. They should not be respected for their commitment to peace and security because they don't have commitments to either of them. Look, what I'm going to do before we get into the main body of this video, why don't I show you a report from France 24? Let's go.
Hello, welcome back to Talking Europe. Henry Kissinger once quipped, "Who do I call if I want to call Europe?" Well, EU Council President Antonio Costa intimates that Donald Trump should be calling him. But so far, the US president appears to have given much more of his time to Vladimir Putin than to Costa or to EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen or to EU Foreign Policy Head Kaja Kallas. While Kallas calls Trump's discussion with Putin about Ukraine appeasement, various EU member states are being more cautious, perhaps wanting to leave themselves wiggle room with the Trump administration further down the line. But the result, in terms of optics at least, is that the EU is struggling to speak as one, and even a hastily convened summit of European leaders called by President Macron in Paris ended with no obvious plan. Top diplomats from the Trump administration then met their Russian counterparts in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, with no Ukrainians present. Well, we're going to discuss all this with two MEPs who work on foreign affairs and on Ukraine. Mark Botenga is a Belgian politician from the left group here in the European Parliament. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
And also Pekka Toveri is a Finnish MEP from the European People's Party. Welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
Let's first, before I get your reactions, listen to the US Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg.
Can you assure this audience that Ukrainians will be at the table and Europeans will be at the table?
The answer to that last question, just as you framed it, the answer is no. The answer to the earlier part of that question is yes. Of course the Ukrainians are going to be at the table.
Mark Botenga, so it's very clear Trump doesn't want...
Okay, apologies for some of the slight technical glitches on that. But I think what's really important here is this, the way the European Union is so determined to put itself at the table. And when you say at the table, what you really mean is this, rather than worrying about peace and security, we're worrying more about the reputation of the European Union. And I think that we now need to start saying that, well, I tell you what we need to start doing is debunking the dishonesty of the European Union. The reality is it is an expansionist bloc. I remember somebody saying, well, the European Union is all about bringing people together in Europe. Well, actually, if you look at it, I'm a Northern European. We've got the United Kingdom that left the European Union, Norway, which has never been a part of the European Union, Iceland has never been a part of the European Union, Denmark, I think, has an opt-out on, is it monetary policy? Ireland has an opt-out on the Schengen Agreement. And so actually the reality is most of Northern Europe is not supportive of the European Union. And what actually tends to happen, I would suggest to you, is this, that we have the Benelux countries creating, if you like, a Benelux empire across the world. Now, look, I genuinely think that the Ukrainians have a right to protect themselves and they have a right to self-determination within their own country. But what's more important is this: you have to recognize that there's two sides to every single story. I will tell you, I've spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe, and I guarantee you that the level of support, the level of treatment of minorities is really, really bad in virtually every Eastern European country. We spend our lives being told by the political left that Britain's the most racist country on earth. It's absolutely terrible. But of course, the reality is rather different. The reality is that Britain is one of the most tolerant countries in the world. The reason you get told that you're not tolerant is because the people that run this country want the country overrun by migrants in order to destroy the economy, destroy the country, so that the left can succeed across the world. But of course, if you look at the treatment of Russian minorities in Eastern Ukraine, it was genuinely dreadful. And let me also make a point about President Zelensky. Look, Kolominsky, I think it's Igor Kolominsky, I think his name is, was the boss of Vladimir Zelensky. He is an oligarch who controlled a large number of assets within Ukraine. He stole $5.5 billion from private bank. And then when President Poroshenko of Ukraine issued an arrest warrant for him, he bought up all the TV companies and ran Vladimir Zelensky as a presidential candidate. And when Zelensky won, what did he do? He gave immunity from prosecution to Kolomoisky, and then he put President Poroshenko in prison. Now, the Supreme Court of Ukraine did free President Poroshenko from prison. But what I don't like is the way that we believe in this goodies and baddies element. I am telling you that the leadership of every former Soviet republic is corrupt. Vladimir Putin, the reason Vladimir Putin is the best person at corruption and theft is because he is the ruler of the largest former Soviet republic. All of them are as dodgy as you like. And I think we've got to remember that in everything that we do, that to an extent, this is a battle between which oligarch can plunder the wealth of Ukraine most effectively. And I will tell you, I was on BBC Radio Scotland the other week, I think it was. And I was saying that President Trump is the only president that has not caused any conflicts around the world. And you know something? They then said to me, what conflict did President Biden start? Let me tell you this. Hunter Biden was paid $20,000 a month. His previous occupation in the military, he was thrown out of for smoking crack. This man works on the board of an oil and gas company in Ukraine. Now, he has absolutely no knowledge of geography, no knowledge of geology, no knowledge of science, no knowledge of chemistry. Any of the things that you would need to work for an oil or gas company, Hunter Biden does not possess. And yet he got the job anyway. Could it be that his dad was vice president of the United States of America, responsible for oil and gas and responsible for Ukraine? I wonder. And so when you talk about the reason why the Ukraine thing was kicked off, it's very simply this. It's a battle between which oligarch can plunder the most. And one of those oligarchs was Joe Biden's son, Hunter. I think that that is something that you have to bear in mind when you look at any of these things, because I'm sick of listening to this concept of the goodies and the baddies. And of course, the idea is always that Vladimir Zelensky, give us the planes and we will do the job. Is always the good guy. And of course, we always say that the Americans, whichever president is, we're always the good guys. Now, I will tell you, the Americans under Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State were not the good guys at all. I mean, the thing is, the thing that's amazing about Hillary Clinton is this. You have to call it SA on this channel because YouTube kick off. But okay, but she supports every woman that accuses anybody of SA. Women need to be believed. We need to support women, unless you accuse her husband, in which case she will come at you with a level of venom that would shock absolutely anybody. And also, I will tell you something about the Clinton Foundation when she was Secretary of State. She literally, I believe, she set up the Clinton Foundation in such a way so that um, if anybody ever told you exactly what the Clinton Foundation was doing, you would think that they were a mad conspiracy theorist, simply because. I'll give you an example. She took money from places like Saudi Arabia and then used that money to pay for Chelsea Clinton's private jet and her wedding. Can you imagine having a foundation that you set up officially to support the poor of the world, and it's instead funding a private jet for your daughter? Absolute moral bankruptcy. But of course, when she was Secretary of State, she took all this money in complete breach of any sense of ethics that you could possibly imagine. She decided to take all this money, and then, of course, foreign policy in the United States of America was shaped by who gave her the largest bribe. I genuinely think that that is something that raises real questions about the decency, the honour, and the honesty of the American system. And so, where should we be as the United Kingdom? Well, okay. First and foremost, we've seen Keir Starmer today back down on this youth free movement thing. I've got to be honest with you, and I know a lot of you disagree with me. I was all right with free movement. I'll tell you what I didn't agree with. I didn't agree with the way that free movement was brought in immediately when these EU countries came in. So when, what was it, Poland, Romania, the Eastern European countries came in, we had the right to put in a temporary block on immigration, and we chose not to do it. But I have to say, as we come now, I don't think there's any particular problem with free movement. Either way, you voted to leave the European Union because you don't want free movement. So it doesn't matter what I think, it matters what you think. And so that ought to be respected. Keir Starmer, one of his red lines in negotiations with the EU was that he wasn't going to allow this free movement for under 30s. Well, of course, that's disappeared within just a few weeks of the quote unquote negotiations. But then again, when we talk about foreign policy and the negotiations that that Keir Starmer has undertaken already, think of this. When they negotiated with Mauritius over the Chagos Islands, the negotiation consisted of the United Kingdom offered, what was it, $17 billion to lease back an airbase. So just to be clear, we currently own the airbase. It was built by the Americans and it's on UK sovereign territory. But what we're now going to do is give it to Mauritius and pay them $17 billion in rent. And they said, yes, we are negotiating with the Labour government. What we've said is, we've said 17 billion is not enough money. And that's the negotiation that you are having, with international players. Somebody said that I sound like I've got a lisp. I think that's really bad. Anyway, I'm trying to get through all your comments. You can see them at the bottom of the screen. Please do subscribe and like and hit the bell notification icon. It's the best way to absolutely guarantee you get all of my videos as soon as they are released. But Britain now needs to be much more serious on an international stage. I don't actually necessarily agree with everything Donald Trump does, but the reality is he's literally trying to come up with a plan to ensure that his country is properly looked after. The Democrats absolutely amaze me. One person threatened President Trump with violence if he didn't stop this Doge thing. And isn't it amazing? They don't actually, as the political left, justify all this horrendous waste. What was it that we spent money on? The Somalian Spice Girls. And there's all this money being thrown around, sloshing around the world. Of course, George Soros's organisation, the Open Society Institute, has received a total of $250 million to run its left-wing causes around the world. That's so we've got the Democrats and the left complaining that somebody is looking into this. They're not defending the spending. They're saying, you must not look at this. You must not consider any of this. This is absolutely disgraceful. And I think we need to do that in the United Kingdom, because we need to start saying that we're going to stand up for our own people, that we're going to stand up for freedom, that we're going to stand up for decency, that we're going to oppose tyranny. And I keep on this channel railing against the Human Rights Act, because from what I can see, the Human Rights Act is only there to defend the bad people. Why is it constantly that it's people like Shamima that get looked after? Why is it constantly that it's people like Levi Belfield that get looked after? If you say the words Tommy Robinson, you get into phenomenal problems. I really think that we've got to be much more willing to stand up for our country. We've got to be much more willing to say that Western values are good. Because you know something? I'm so sick of equal but different. You think about the plight of the Uyghurs in China, 2.5 million of them in concentration camps. And when I saw the visit of President Trump, I saw all of those protesters, all of those lefties kicking off and saying what a disgrace he was. And then President Xi of China comes and not a squeak of criticism was put forward. And you think, what is the level of hypocrisy that we are talking about here? Because we've got a man who has made some off-colour remarks, and then you've got a guy who's got 2.5 million people in concentration camps. Which is the guy you protest? The guy who makes the off-colour remarks. I think that shows a level of moral bankruptcy. And the reality is, what the European Union wants, what the political left wants, what Keir Starmer wants, is to ensure that Britain does not succeed, that the West does not succeed. I remember once the European Union saying that it was a response to the Anglo-Saxon free trade capitalism of the United States of America. They want a new Iron Curtain in Europe. They lamented the fall of the Soviet Union. They secretly loved what was done by that regime. The socialism is not dead. In 1989, how stupid were you? Certainly I was stupid, although I was only about 9 years old. Do you remember that Christmas in 1989 when the Soviet Union was falling to bits? The Berlin Wall was being smashed apart in front of our eyes, and everybody thought that that this was the end of history. Because if you think about it, fascism was gone, communism was gone, and everybody thought they were going to live together in peace and harmony. And I know it was difficult for the former Soviet Union, but everybody believed that they were going to start rubbing along together. That was garbage. What has now happened, my friends, is very simply this. You can no longer say that socialist economics is good. You can no longer say that socialist free speech exists. You cannot say that socialism will make you happy, healthy, wealthy, any of those things. You can't make those claims. The only thing you can now do if you're Owen Jones, the only thing you can now do if you're Keir Starmer, the only thing you can now do if you're the European Union is to start saying that in addition to socialism being terrible, so is our system. And that's why they start taking apart the family. That's why they start destroying the health of young people. That's why you start, amputating the genitals of the mentally ill and all the rest of those things that the politically correct left want to do. Because now, once you start destroying Western society, you can start to say, well, okay, we accept that North Korea is awful. We accept that the Soviet Union was awful. But always remember, our system's bad as well. So what we might as well do, we might as well have socialism because it's all as bad as each other. And I think that we have to rail against that. We have to stand up for our freedoms and our principles. And I'll tell you something else. We need to start looking at the United Nations. Now, I will tell you, the United Nations, I think, in a sense, was a well-meaning idea when it first started. The idea was that you were going to bring together all the countries of the world. There was going to be a forum to discuss things. Well, what has happened is it's turned into effectively not a one world government, because it doesn't have that level of power. But what it does is, rather than enabling countries to talk to each other, rather than enabling people to air their grievances, what we get instead from the United Nations is that the views, the backward views of the dictators of the world are served up to the free countries of the world. We're forced now to doff our caps. I mean, what was it? The Women's Rights Committee with Iran holding the chairmanship of it. And you think, well, hang on a second, that is just absolutely ludicrous. And we see that, free countries are rebuked all the time, whereas the dictatorships are never rebuked. Nobody ever worries about what happens with them. We have to worry instead about the West. And so the United Nations is no longer about bringing people together. It is about crushing dissent. And what is the dissent it seeks to crush? It seeks to crush those people that believe in freedom, those people who believe in democracy, those people who believe in rule of law, those people who believe that we should be defending those principles. And then I'll say something about this Chagos Island situation, because Keir Starmer and David Lammy genuinely believe something that is completely and totally wrong. And Donald Trump knows that they're completely and totally wrong. What they believe is that if you create international law, if you have the whole world ruled by judges arguing in international courtrooms, then that is a good thing. So it doesn't matter that Britain loses a strategic benefit. It doesn't matter that Britain is no longer a powerful country. It doesn't matter that you plunge people into poverty in this country. What matters more than anything else is that you've done so. And in doing so, you've created a sense of international law. And that is what they genuinely believe to be true. Now, I'm going to tell you something about international law. You're not going to believe this. It doesn't exist. International law is garbage. What happens is there are treaties between various countries, and you're not supposed to renege on those treaties. But let me tell you something. The Treaty of Utrecht said that the United Kingdom ought to be able to trade with France and Spain as if it were France and Spain itself. Well, the European Union has completely ignored that treaty. But what we're going to do is we're going to pretend they haven't. The reality is treaties are created and altered all the time. And there's nothing wrong with that. But to suggest there is some sort of body of international law and some sort of court and some sort of world government, some sort of parliament, the United Nations for the world, is absolutely absolutely ridiculous. It's simply not true. And then you get the situation, which I think is more ludicrous than anything. Israel doesn't sign up to the International Criminal Court, and yet Palestine does, even though it's not a country. And then they start prosecuting people from Israel and not prosecuting anyone from the Palestinian area. Well, that's unbelievable. What a remarkable piece of hypocrisy. What a remarkable piece of stupidity. And by the way, I will say one thing. Thank you so much to everyone who's commenting. I totally agree with you. The J.D. Vance speech in Munich was absolutely fantastic, and it's on this channel. By the way, I'm going to improve the quality of the videos that I put onto the channel, because what I've been doing is I've been screen recording them rather than just attempting to download them. Hey. Where do we go from here? Well, I think there's something really interesting, isn't there? I think that we've got a situation where there's a global fight back, isn't there, for freedom and democracy. Donald Trump said that he could never have won the first presidential election had it not been for Brexit in the United Kingdom. Brexit in the United Kingdom might not have happened because of Breitbart, which is where I worked. But I just genuinely think that that this is a global movement, that we are all in it together. And so that is a good thing. So I think just as President Trump has won in the United States of America, I think that either Nigel Farage is going to win the next election, or he's going to be extremely significant, perhaps the official opposition. Now, every time I mention reform, I have to remind you that little UKIP is doing great. Nick Tanconi is a really, really great bloke. And I just want to remind everybody that, you know, there are two political parties working. I appreciate that reform is bigger than UKIP, but I never want to let them out in the sit out in the cold simply because we need to remember how much work they're doing. So I always want to support them. Oh, and by the way, the last thing on the agenda for today is people are talking about the World Health Organization, that fake doctor, Dr. Tedros. Just to be clear, he's an Ethiopian communist. He is not a medical doctor. He's the first head of the World Health Organization to not be a medical doctor. And what's he doing? Well, the reality is, we keep saying of international bodies, we always say about the EU, the UN, the World Health Organization, well, they're a bit corrupt, but it's better than nothing. Let me tell you, in the case of the World Health Organization, there's absolutely no doubt that it is not better than nothing. Had the World Health Organization not existed, the coronavirus pandemic would have been less severe than it was because they prioritized defending the reputation of communist China over attempting to deal with the problem. How many times were the World Health Organization determined to try and deny that this thing came out of a lab? And also, they now want powers to lock down countries even against their wishes and take a percentage of the healthcare budget. Nobody, but nobody could possibly claim that the World Health Organization is better than nothing. The World Health Organization is undoubtedly worse than not having anything at all. And I think it delivered, along with our own governments, by the way, one of the worst displays of public policy. The United Kingdom placed the entire population under house arrest because what we did was we had a plan for what to do in the case of a pandemic, but we decided to not bother following that plan. What we did instead was we followed the plan of communist China. What are we talking about? By the way, I don't know if you know this, but one country did follow the UK's plan for what to do in a pandemic. It was a country that was so small that it wasn't able to come up with its own plan because it didn't have the resources. So it printed off the plan from the UK Department for Health website and implemented it. That country is Sweden. And so when we all collectively lost our marbles during the pandemic, the country that actually followed our plan was the country that was best off in the world. Well, the EU, and look at this comment here. The EU is a joke militarily, and I do accept that. But the danger here, as I end this video, is that what we're going to see is we are going to see the EU doing what the EU always does, undermining the democratic states, undermining freedom, undermining rule of law. That's the great danger. The danger is not there's going to be a battle between the United States of America and the EU. That's not going to happen. What will happen instead is that we will see our attempts to bring peace and security to Europe once again undermined by the EU. And I'll end this where I started, just by saying the following. The European Union has justified its existence for 50 years or whatever it is on the grounds that it is there to ensure peace and stability in Europe. It has, at the very least, failed to discharge that on multiple occasions. Now, there are some of you watching this who believe that they are responsible for what happened in Ukraine. There are others that who will disagree. But can we all agree on this one very simple point, that whatever they've done and whatever they haven't done, peace and security has not been delivered on the watch of the European Union. And that, my friends, is the problem. What they are doing is prioritizing their own vanity, prioritizing their own corruption, prioritizing their own jobs, prioritizing their own position over and above what we should really be doing in terms of defending Europe. Because Europe actually is a great place. It's a place that has a remarkable level of diversity. Overrunning it with foreign cultures is not going to improve it. I think what will improve Europe is a return to democracy, a return to freedom. And let me now tell you about multiculturalism and throwing people together. In my fridge right now. I've got some of my favourite things. I've got a roast chicken. I've got some lamb. I've got some curry. I've got some beer. I've got a bottle of vodka, and I've got some Coca-Cola. I like all of these things. If you believe in multiculturalism, if you believe in the European Union, then you would tell me right now that the way to improve all of those products is to put them all together in a bowl and blend them together. Turn them into a hybrid of all of it. You know, chicken and vodka with curry on top. But of course, if you like each of these foods, it makes perfect sense that you will improve them, you will enrich them by putting them together and blending them. It's garbage. It's simply not true. Some of the countries in the world with the most interesting cultures and heritage are countries that have been really walled off from the world. I'm thinking particularly Japan, but perhaps also some of the city-states of Italy. Thank you so much for watching this podcast. I've enjoyed doing it. I've enjoyed doing this live show. I'm going to do more of them and I guess so. Until next time, arrivederci and goodbye.